recently passed away from a brain tumour at Peter Mac, who's a long-term Buddhist practitioner. And so we make this offering of light to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas with the thought that Peter may have a very peaceful passing through the intermediate state. He may quickly have a high rebirth, come under the guidance of kind and wise teachers in his next life, and quickly progress on the path to enlightenment. And also that all of his family and friends may have the comfort and support of the Buddhas at this time. And also an offering for Gilberry, a dear friend of the Tibetan Buddhist Society, who's currently suffering from a very serious illness. So this offering of light is made with the thought and the prayer that Gil and all of his family are held in the compassionate care of all Buddhas, all enlightened beings, including the Venerable Geshe Acharya Thubten Loden. And that they receive the blessing and energy to develop continuously all realizations on the path to enlightenment. Okay, so we start with prayers. So we'll do begin with the prayer of praise to Shakyamuni Buddha in both Tibetan and English. Tempa Chandende Dejin Shepa Drachampa Yangdapa Tsope Sanje Ripa Dang Shapsu Tempa Dewa Shepa Jitin Chempa Chebudu E Kalo Joa Lana Mepa Flada Minam Chi Tempa Sanje Chandende Peljawa Shakya Dupala Shasalo Churu Chapsu Chiwo. Teacher, Bhagawan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly pure and complete Buddha, all-knowing, having poise, Sugata, apprehender of the world, navigator of beings to be subdued, incomparable, teacher of gods and humans, to the Buddha, the Bhagawan, the glorious conqueror Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. And next the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, again both in Tibetan and English. Sangichodang Tsochi Chognam La Jangchu Badu Danye Chasu Chi Dage Jin Soy Jepe Sonam Ji Dola Penchi Sangye Dropashu. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. Through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. To the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I go for refuge until becoming enlightened. through the merit of my generosity and so on, may I achieve Buddhahood to benefit all beings. And next, the short mandala offering. Today we'll do this in English only. This ground, anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, Mount Meru, the 4 continents, adorned with sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered thus, may all beings enjoy such pure lands. It's the 7-limbed prayer. I prostrate my 3 doors with a mind of respect, and offer all actually arranged and mentally emanated offerings. I reveal all the downfalls and negativities that I have ever collected, and rejoice in the virtues of individuals and superiors. Please remain perfectly abiding until samsara is no longer seen. I request you to turn the vast and profound wheels of Dharma. I dedicate the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. And today we'll do the prayer of the lineage of gurus only in English. Body born from 1,000,000 magnificent excellent virtues, speech fulfilling the hopes of infinite beings, a mind that sees all objects of knowledge precisely, I bow my head to the chief among the Shakyas. Supreme sons of the incomparable teacher, carrying the load of all the conqueror's deeds, by their emanations appearing in countless realms, I prostrate to Maitreya and Manjushri. The mother of conquerors is difficult to fathom. The precise thought is in commentaries written by Jambudvipa's ornaments, Nagarjuna and Asanga. I prostrate at the feet of those most renowned in the 3 realms. From these 2 great chariots come the excellent lineages of the paths of profound view and vast deeds, their essential points gathered thoroughly and without fault. Prostration to the lamp, holding this treasury of instruction. Giving explanation through compassion, by seeing precisely and completely the essential points of all paths of Sutra and Tantra, holder of the Conqueror's entire holy Dharma. Prostrations to the glorious Losang Dragpa. I, seeing all the infinite teachings, supreme way of crossing for those entering the journey to liberation. Moved by compassion, the deeds skilled in method, prostrations to the spiritual masters who make everything clear. And the great treasury of excellence, the prayer of the path to enlightenment in English only. The kind master is the basis of all qualities, and proper alliance is the root of the path. By seeing this excellence and through much striving, bestow blessing to be devoted with great respect. This gentle support of freedom obtained this one time is most difficult to achieve. Knowing its great value gives rise to a mind seizing its essence constantly day and night. Bestow blessing to generate this continuum unceasingly. It is like a bubble in water, this constantly moving body and life. Thus remember the swift collapse of death. Beyond death, like body and shadow, white and black karmic results follow after. By gaining firm certainty in this, the mass of faults, subtle and very subtle, are abandoned, and the accomplishment of all virtuous collections completed. Bestow blessings to ever attain conscientiousness. The qualities of samsara are unfit to be trusted, the door to all suffering. Do not be content with these enjoyments. By knowing its defects, bestow blessing to develop a great aspiration for the bliss of liberation. By that pure thought, great conscientiousness is drawn forth, and mindfulness and awareness of the individual liberation, the root of the teachings. Bestow blessings to make this the essential practice. Just as I myself have fallen into samsara's ocean, all living beings as mother are also like that. By seeing the responsibility for the liberation of beings, bestow blessings to be trained in supreme bodhicitta. However, by merely generating the mind, if not acquainted with the 3 aspects of ethics, enlightenment will not be attained. By seeing this excellence, bestow blessings to train with strong effort in the vows of conqueror sons. Pacifying distraction toward perverse objects, by way of proper analysis of the perfect meaning, bestow blessings to swiftly and continuously generate the path related to the union of calm abiding and special insight. Thus, becoming a vessel trained in the common paths, enter the Vajrayana, supreme evolution of all vehicles. Bestow blessings to engage the easy path itself, that sacred way of crossing for fortunate beings. The base of practice for the two aspects of attainment is when guarding the pure vows of commitment is found to be genuine and certain. Bestow blessings to protect them even at risk of life. Then, by understanding properly the important points, which are the essence of the two stages of the Tantra classes, bestow blessings to practice according to these holy teachings with continuous effort in the Supreme Four-Session Yoga. Like that, may the spiritual friend revealing the gentle path and the friends of proper practice stand firm. Bestow blessings to quickly pacify the masses of outer and inner hindrances. In all rebirths may I never be parted from perfect gurus and the enjoyment of the glorious Dharma. By utterly completing all qualities, paths and grounds, may I quickly achieve the state of Vajradhara. So today we'll do a meditation on mindfulness of body and mind. So beginning first by setting our physical posture. Sitting comfortably with our back straight. Hands folded in the lap, with the right hand on the left palm, with the thumb tips touching. Arms extended out slightly at the elbow. Mouth, jaw and tongue natural and relaxed. Our head slightly tilted forward. And with our eyes half open and half closed. And to initially settle the mind, allowing it for a short time to rest on the natural rise and fall of our breath. Allowing our awareness to gather inwards, releasing all external sense objects. Also letting go of all mental wandering. Memories of the past. Plans or speculation about the future. For this short time, allow our awareness to rest fully in the present moment. Settling on just one object. The natural rise and fall of our breath. Then turn our awareness to our body. Beginning at the very top of our head. Allowing our awareness to settle and abide there. So it is the main focus of our attention. Then allowing our attention to move downwards into our face. Noticing and releasing any tightness or tension. But mainly just resting in full awareness. On that part of our body. Then allowing our attention to move down to our neck and shoulders. Just letting our awareness settle there. Relaxing any tension. Allow our awareness to extend to our arms. Beginning in the upper portion, our forearm, our hands and fingers, simply resting mindfully in those parts of our body. And allowing our awareness to center on our chest. In the same way. Simply being aware of the sensations there. Then moving downwards to our abdomen. And then allow our awareness to move to our legs. The upper leg, lower leg, down to the feet and toes. And then simply dwell on our awareness of the whole body. Our sense of having a body, our awareness of it. We then develop mindfulness of mind. Allowing our attention to turn inwards, focusing on our own mind. Our experience, moment to moment. Mind's conventional nature is mere clarity and awareness. Clarity means that appearances or experiences arise successively in mind. Awareness means inseparably from the arising of the experience, we know it. So we simply quietly observe this process. Whether what arises is pleasant or unpleasant, whether the mind is calm or agitated. Whether what arises is memories, plans, feelings or wishes. We just observe them as they arise. We don't push them away. We don't grasp onto them. Whatever arises, just acknowledge it as arisen. Accept it and release it. Releasing doesn't mean pushing anything away. Just watch. As we observe an appearance that arises in mind, it naturally dissolves back into the clarity of mind. Allowing our awareness to remain with this object mind. This is mindfulness of mind. If we find that our attention has become captured by something that has arisen in mind. Simply become aware of that. Observe our experience in the moment. Gently release it. Observe it dissolve back into the clarity of mind. If we find our thoughts slow down, mind becomes very still. Times when no thoughts or feelings arise. Simply settle into that stillness and clarity. We can dedicate the merit of our meditation, thinking through this practice of cultivating mindfulness of body and mind. May my mindfulness develop more and more. May my wisdom develop more and more. Through this, may all my good qualities develop more and more. My kindness, my compassion, my love, through this, may I step by step develop the peerless mind of bodhicitta. Through this, step by step, may I progress through all of the stages of the Mahayana. And for the sake of others, quickly, easily attain enlightenment and Buddhahood. Bringing every other living being without exception to that state. We can release our attention and conclude the meditation. Thanks, Monica. So we're still going through part 4 of Path to Enlightenment, the teachings on the medium scope, and in particular, we're going through in detail the Geshe's explanation of the Four Noble Truths. The first of them, that we've gone through in detail, true sufferings, or explaining why any experience of psychic existence ultimately cannot satisfy us. Why, although our basic motivation is continuously to seek for happiness, fulfillment, satisfaction, contentment, ultimately there's no way, given while we're a living being in psychic existence, that we're able to realise that. The second true cause. So why is it that our experience is like that? What are the causes of psychic existence? Thirdly, that by understanding the causes, we can recognise that in principle it's possible to put an end to the experience of psychic existence. If we understand the causes, by removing those causes, then we can achieve the third noble truth, true cessation. And the actual method to doing that, to removing the causes of psychic existence, developing these states of mind that will act as the opponents to the cause, and this is true paths. So we've just begun on the second of these, looking at the actual causes of psychic existence, with the explanation of this appearing in chapters 14 and 15 of Path to Enlightenment. So I won't go into the full outline of the medium scope, because we've done that in quite a bit of detail in the previous classes, but briefly the explanation of the second noble truth of true source is in 3 parts, and these are summarised on page 415 of the text. So firstly, how it is that delusions arise. Secondly, how karma is created in dependence on delusions. And thirdly, the way one dies and is conceived. And this follows the basic logic of the second noble truth. The fundamental cause of psychic existence, the real true cause, is delusions in general, and as we'll see, and in particular, self-grasping ignorance. Delusions create karma, and the second section of the explanation explains how that happens, and the way one dies and is conceived explains how this pattern is reflected both in this life but continues through the cycle of subsequent lives as well. So the first subject, how delusions arise, again, this has 4 parts, and these are summarised at the top of page 416 of Path to Enlightenment. So firstly, we identify the delusions, we understand what it is they are exactly. We need to do this in order to be able to recognise them within our own mental continuum, the stages in which they develop, so how it is that delusions develop, the process, thirdly the causes of them, so what are the circumstances that will trigger our deluded states of mind, and fourth, the faults of delusions, what the problems are with them, where they lead if we give them free rein. So identifying the delusions we started on last week, and mentioned that Path to Enlightenment tackles it in 2 ways. So first, it starts off with a general definition of delusion. That is a description of the things that are characteristic of any deluded state of mind. And the main characteristic, and this follows from the general definition, is that when any form of delusion arises, our mental continuum becomes unpeaceful, or becomes agitated or disturbed in some way. So if we think about it, we can see this. If we are angry, for example, about something, then we're not relaxed. Our mind is churned up, turbulent. It's difficult to be relaxed if we're very angry. If our mind is dominated by great grasping attachment, likewise, we get churned up by the fact that we feel this continuous strong need for some type of external object, and agitation at the thought that we might not be able to hold on to it, or that we might lose it. If we have strong pride or ego, the same way, we feel this insecurity that means that we need to bolster up our mind, our sense of who we are. So whatever the delusion is, it has this characteristic of being agitated or lacking peace. And as we commented last week, that's a good basic first level test to figure out how strong delusion is in our mind at any one time. Generally, if our mind feels agitated, tense, upset, all churned up, well, then that's a good sign that at that time delusions are manifest. We then go into the explanation of individual delusions, and mentioned last week, in fact, there are limitless different types of delusion, but they are commonly classified into 6 root delusions. That is, desirous attachment, anger, pride, ignorance, doubt, and deluded view. And Geshe explains that the last one of these, deluded view, actually has 5 different subtypes. And these are a little bit different from the first 5. The first 5, speaking not technically, but just generally, the first 5 seem to come more from the gut. So if we are angry, then it isn't as if there's any thinking process going on. It's something that comes up viscerally. Likewise, if we have great desirous attachment or great pride, these are things that come up, that seem to come up directly. And we can also see, for example, with anger and attachment in particular, that non-human beings exhibit those characteristics. Whereas these last 5, deluded view, again, generally speaking, not technically speaking, generally they're more about beliefs or attitudes that we have, but we'll see more about that as we go through. We started talking about the first of the 6, desirous attachment, last week. So generally, as we saw then, it's defined right at the beginning as a mental factor or a type of mental process that perceives some external object or an internal object as attractive, that exaggerates that attractiveness and wishes to possess and retain the object of attachment. And the explanation talks about the different ways that manifests and the various opponents, the way that we can deal with desirous attachment. So we won't go into all that again. One subject that often does come up with desirous attachment that Geshe doesn't specifically talk about in the text, though, is, well, can we really be free of desirous attachment? So we all have close relationships with people of one form or another. Can we really realistically be free of desirous attachment in our relationships with others, especially those who are close to us? And would we even want to be, not have any attachment? In our own life, we're usually the kindest, we're often at our best, our kindest, our most helpful, our most supportive to the people who are really close to us, who are the people that we are most attached to. Those people bring out our good qualities. So we're inevitably going to be attached at some level to the people who are close to us. The answer to that question is that really comes down to the difference between love and attachment. So all of the ordinary people that we have relationships with who are closest to us in our life, we're going to have some mix of love and attachment in that relationship. Through our mind of love, then we have the attitude, the wish of wanting that other person to be happy, of wanting things to go well for them, of wanting that person to get what they want, to have pleasant experiences. When we have attachment in our relationship, what we really want, what the mind of attachment is doing, is it's focusing on the happiness that we want for ourselves and that we think is going to come, that we are going to experience by holding on to that person. The mind of love, to the extent that that's in our relationship, it's about the other person. The mind of attachment is fundamentally about us, all about us. In our relationships with others, with family, partner, friendships, we're going to have both a mix of desirous attachment and love until we're completely free of desirous attachment. But the more that our relationships are based on love, the stronger and more productive our relationships will be, and the more happiness that they will bring to ourselves and others. The more that our relationship is dominated by attachment, the less stable it will be, and the more stress and tension will be in that relationship. So even though our relationships at the moment can't be completely free of attachment, we can understand, we can develop a perspective on the extent to which we have the attachment in a relationship and how it works, and we can develop the attitude of love more and more in our relationship. If we could magically be free tomorrow of our desirous attachment in our relationship, that wouldn't mean that the relationship would end. It wouldn't mean that we would somehow become remote and lacking any type of affection. We would simply hold the person in some sort of with some sort of attitude of polite goodwill. If we were free of desirous attachment, it would mean that all of our relationships could be based purely on love. It would all be about the other person, what the other person needed, and not focused or hooked on what it is that we need. We would see and relate to the person more purely from the point of view of what they wanted and not through the lens of what we want. The second of the six is the mind of anger, and Geshe-la's explanation begins on page 419. Again, he starts off with a definition. So anger is a mental factor or mental function process that perceives an object as unattractive, it exaggerates the unattractiveness of that object, becomes antagonistic, and wishes to harm the object. So we experience anger generally when somebody harms us, or we perceive that they are harming us, or we perceive that they are harming somebody close to us, or if they side with somebody whom we regard as an enemy or somebody that we don't like. The first element of anger is this appearance of unattractiveness. But this appearance comes from us. And it usually comes from the mind of self-cherishing, our pattern of mainly focusing on what we perceive as our own benefit. So suppose somebody says something really unpleasant to us, something really rude or hurtful or insensitive, then when that happens, immediately we trigger this feeling of mental discomfort. Because we have self-cherishing, all we want to hear is people saying nice, gentle, complimentary, supportive things the whole time. If we could set things up like that, that's all we would want to hear from other people. This person who has said something that we don't want to hear at all is seen as a source of this mental discomfort that's actually being generated within our own mind. Nobody can change our mind. This experience that we're having has been generated from our mind in response to a stimulus. But the way our mind works, we sort of think, well, the source of this feeling that I don't like is coming from what that person said, and so therefore that must be a bad person. And so we paint what we see as the source of this discomfort that we have as being unattractive. Again, this is an instant, visceral reaction, doesn't depend on logical or thought out process. We never stop to think about why it might be that the person said that maybe the person is tired or stressed, that there's something else going in their life that really, in a way, we're not the target of what they said. And we certainly don't usually reflect that at our worst times in life, we ourselves might have done something like that. That through lack of mindfulness, through being upset, that from time to time we might have also said something hurtful to others. But in the moment, this thing being flung at us, this thing that we really don't like, none of that goes on. We just have this instant, visceral, explosive type of reaction. And what we do then is we exaggerate this hurt, or this harm, or this discomfort that we feel. We have this process, this mental chatter that builds it up. What an outrageous thing for that person to have said to me. How unbelievable that they could have done that. So we build it up, we exaggerate it more and more. And the next thing that we want to do is that we want to hit back. So our mind wants to hit back at the source of this discomfort. Just wait till I see that person again. I'm really going to let them know what I think about them next time I see them. And I need to, immediately that I see somebody else, I've got to tell them about what this dreadful thing that this person said to me and how bad that person is. This sort of process goes on like that. Anger is the worst type of negative mind. It can bring about the worst possible consequences for living beings. Every war in human history began at some level with the seed of anger, with this impulse to harm. Anger easily escalates if we allow it to. One of the analogies that's given in the Buddhist text is that anger is a bit like a fire. You just need one little spark, but if you fan it, it can soon develop into a huge conflagration. It's very, very easy when we feel upset or angry about something to stew on it, meaning that the anger just becomes stronger and stronger. And also we're very easily motivated when that happens to retaliate and harm the object of anger and to feel that it's quite reasonable for us to do that. That person did that to me, why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I hit back? I'm completely justified in doing that. So if the person says something hurtful to us, we feel through our anger that it's okay for us to say something equally hurtful or more hurtful back to that person to really show them. But of course, if we think that's going to fix the situation, that's going to remove the mental discomfort that we're feeling from what we heard, well, of course, we're completely mistaken. In fact, most likely it's going to make it worse. If we say something as bad or worse to the person who said that, well, then they're going to become angry themselves. And that will cause them to in turn exaggerate what we have said to them, and they will come back with an even stronger reaction. There's no other delusion that so easily causes us to lose our peace of mind or our self-control. In the worst types of rage or anger, people can kill others and completely change the course of their own life as well as that of other people's, just in an instant through a moment of anger. The opponent to anger is the mind of patience. And also, generally, the more we develop our compassion and our love, then the better we deal with anger, or the less room we have for anger to develop if our attitude towards others is naturally one of wishing to avoid harm to them. Anger is sometimes viewed as a really strong, assertive, powerful sort of mind, but if we analyse, it's actually a childish mind because it lacks any control or wisdom. To say that it's a good idea to avoid anger and to reduce and ultimately eliminate our source of anger doesn't mean that we have to be continuously passive. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be forceful, stand against injustice, against people or things that are harmful or dangerous. We can do that if we're coming from a position of wisdom and compassion. There's no difficulty whatsoever in standing up against somebody or something that is harmful and forcefully doing so if we're coming to that without so much anger. If we have anger when we're doing that, then our reaction won't be as effective. Actually, of the two, anger and patience, it's patience that's the strong mind, the courageous mind, the powerful mind. It's very, very easy to chuck a wobbly. Very, very easy to get upset about something that we don't like. It takes no effort, takes no wisdom. We just don't like something, and so we just fly off the handle. Really, really easy to do that. Applying and developing patience requires much more strength and wisdom. The third state of mind is the mind of pride. And Geshe's explanation begins on page 420. So pride is defined as a mental factor that grasps at the inflated feeling of being superior. So Geshe says it's an arrogant state of mind where we put ourselves above others, and we can have this attitude of pride about any number of things, about our appearance, our wealth, our background, our knowledge, our job, our qualification, or whatever. Geshe makes the point that if we approach our Dharma practice with pride or big ego, well then it means that our progress stops. If it's very, very difficult to learn from others, to really develop ourselves, if we feel that nobody else could really teach us anything because we're the best, we're the smartest person in the room, we're right about everything. Deluded pride is based on insecurity and a fragile ego, and so to that extent it's very different from having self-confidence or self-esteem. People sometimes use the word pride differently, so sometimes they say, well, we should be proud of ourselves, or we should be proud of our culture, our background, our heritage, our community, or whatsoever. Now that's different. That's not deluded pride. Valuing who we are, who we've come from, our experience and so forth, that in itself isn't deluded pride if it doesn't include this inflated feeling of being superior. If we feel, I have this background and because of this background, I'm better than everybody else, that's deluded pride. But merely taking value, our heritage, background, so forth, that's different. The main opponent to the mind of pride is to recognise the good qualities of others and to rejoice and take happiness in those qualities. The fourth mind is the mind of ignorance. And Geshe begins his explanation on the top of page 421. So sometimes people use the term unawareness instead of ignorance because ignorance can have negative, judgmental kind of connotations. But ignorance, all it literally means is not knowing something or knowing something in a confused way. So the definition that Geshe gives here, it's defined as a deluded state of mind that is confused about its object by being unclear about the real nature of things. For example, the law of cause and effect, 3 jewels, 4 noble truths, and so forth. So there's any number of different ways we can be confused and ignorant, or things that can be objects of ignorance, but there are 2 particular ones that are talked about at this point in the text. So the first type is the ignorance of cyclic existence and the ignorance of karma. And these are singled out because they're, especially if we don't have a sense of cause and effect, if we don't have the recognition of the consequences that come from our positive and negative actions, well, then we make little effort to reduce our negative actions or to cultivate positive actions. It's a bit, so the way this type of ignorance works, ignorance of cause and effect, it's a bit like smoking in the first half of the 20th century when nobody really realised what its health impacts were. So lots of people would smoke cigarettes. It never even occurred to them that what they were doing was damaging their body, simply because they didn't know. They didn't recognise the relationship of cause and effect. But whether they recognised it or not, they were still experiencing the effect. It's like that if we don't have mindfulness of our actions of body, speech and mind, and of the consequences that they bring for us. If that's the case, not only do we cause harm to others through lack of mindfulness, but the real issue is that ultimately we're bringing that back onto ourselves through the force of karma. The second type of ignorance that's talked about here is the ignorance that's confused about the true nature of self and phenomena. And it's this ignorance that's the root ignorance that is actually binds us to cyclic existence. It's this ignorance that is actually the source of all other delusions, and it's the source of the first noble truth of true sufferings. Geshe explains that this type of ignorance is called self-grasping ignorance. And the reason for that is that it observes a phenomenon, so it observes oneself or the I. It also observes other phenomena, and it grasps at those, a self and other phenomena, as being self-existent or being inherently existent. So usually when we use the word self, usually we think of that in terms of a person, so myself, yourself, and so forth. But here, when we're talking about self-grasping ignorance, we're also talking about objects other than people. So phenomena other than people are included. So the way that works as a common element is that when we have self-grasping of the person, we really feel that there is a self that's attributable to the I, or that's attributable to another person, that really, truly exists from its own side. When we experience another person, for example, all we actually perceive is the body of the person. And the concept of body is imputed on the parts of the person. Nonetheless, we hold that within the parts of that person, there exists something that is truly, inherently self-existent from its own side. It's the same with objects. So this book, for example, this book is actually a collection of a whole lot of parts. So many different pages. If I asked you if this page is a book, then you would say, well, no, of course it's not a book, it's a page. But we can go through each of the parts of the book and conclude that none of them is a book, but nonetheless we have a book. We hold there to be a self, something within this that is actually a book from its own side, something that makes it a book, even though we can agree that none of the parts of it is actually a book. So that's where this idea of there being a self of phenomena as well as a self of person comes from. That's what it's talking about. To understand this sort of ignorance, we need to do a lot of reflection, study, and deep meditation on it, particularly to understand and see how it's working in our own mental continuum. But when we have done that, then in principle, it's possible to eliminate it by its opposite, by developing the wisdom that perceives the actual way that self and phenomena exist. That is, the wisdom that perceives that although objects and people appear to have a self that exists from their own side, that's mere appearance. That in fact, because everything is a dependent arising, it can't possibly exist in the way that it appears, because the way that it appears is that it exists independently from its own side. To say that objects lack true existence, lack inherent existence, doesn't imply that objects or phenomena or ourselves don't exist at all. It does imply that they don't have this self-existent mode of existing. Their actual way of existing is contradictory to that, namely as dependent arisings. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to talk about the deluded view, especially the first of them. The next is the mind of doubt, and Geshe's explanation begins on page 422. So this is defined as a mental factor that is two-pointed and wavers in indecision regarding some object. And Geshe says it's a great obstacle to realizations. He says it's a bit like trying to sew with a needle that has 2 points. So if our mind is constantly vacillating, maybe this is right, maybe that is right, then it's impossible to actually get anywhere. If our mind has this continuous vacillating quality, for example, about the existence of Buddha, then how could we possibly progress towards the state of the Buddha? If we have this constant vacillating doubt about whether psychic existence is really something that exists in the way it's said or that we want to escape from, then we can never gain the realization of renunciation. So it's important to recognise that we are always going to have some degree of doubt while we lack complete wisdom. We're always not going to be able to directly perceive whether something is correct or not. The antidote, therefore, to doubt is that we develop our wisdoms of listening, thinking, and meditation. In our own experience, we become familiar through meditation, through introspection, with how our own mind works. We compare that understanding that we get with the teachings. So the teachings present a certain way that it's said that the mind works, that our mind functions. We compare the teachings with what our own personal observations and experience are. And if they line up, then that gives us more confidence that the source of the teachings is also reliable in other respects that we can't correctly check. If they don't line up, then as the Buddha himself said, well then don't worry. Then we don't need to progress. That isn't working for us. But hence the importance of ourselves carefully analysing and checking the teachings. Really important not to misunderstand this point about doubt. What it isn't saying that if we have doubts, if we have questions about something, then we're just deluded. That the right thing to do is just unconditionally believe something that's in a text just because it's in a text. We need to use our wisdom. We need to use our inference. Investigate the teachings, investigate the teacher, and do that honestly and with an open mind. Dealing with our uncertainty and our doubt, the way we deal with that is by developing our wisdom, not just by thinking, well, I have to believe that because this person says that and everybody says that they're a really great teacher, or because the other people around me seem to believe that. We need to go through the process of checking for ourselves. Geshe also makes the point that one manifestation of doubt is having a very agitated mind. Should I do this? Should I do that? In our normal life, one useful way of dealing with that, we're not sure, should I do this? Should I do that? Is single-pointed meditation. So if we settle our mind down, for example, through meditation on the breath, well, then that means that we have less agitation and we have more space to make a clear decision. So finally, we have the deluded views, and there are 5 of these, and the first of these, the view of the transitory collection, is by far the most important. So I'll start talking about that now. We probably won't get through the explanation because it's even though it's explained in half a page, it's actually a really huge subject. And it's a huge subject because really this is actually the very root of all other delusions. So we talked before about ignorance, especially the second type of ignorance, and the fourth type of root delusion being the source of psychic existence. This gives a more specific analysis. It's actually this view of the transitory collection that's the more fundamental or specific cause of all of our other problems. So Geshe leads off with, firstly, a description of what this view of the transitory collection is. So he says, it's a deluded view that observes the appropriated aggregates and conceives of them as I and mine. So firstly, it observes the appropriated aggregates. So the aggregates are things that comprise us, things that are parts of us. They are our parts. So if we're talking about that from the point of view of the aggregates, traditionally in Buddhist philosophy we talk about the 5 aggregates, 4 of those relating to the mind and 1 relating to the body. That's a really general explanation. So it's like so in generally we could say that the deluded view observes our body and our mind. And we could say that. It's not precise, but still. Together, those constituents, those things that make us up, our various parts together, we call the aggregate of those the person. It observes the appropriated aggregates. Geshe doesn't really explain, well, it doesn't explain what appropriated means, but when we refer to something being appropriated, it means it belongs to, or it's our property. And so in the case of our body and mind, we feel that they are, in some sense, belong to us, even though we didn't buy them, even though we didn't make them or create them. Sometimes we feel that they are ours, and we even say, my hand, my body, my mind. So we observe the appropriated aggregates, and we conceive of them as I and mine. Geshe talks a lot more about this, about the view of the transitory collection, in his great treasury of Mahamudra text. And I'll bring in some of the detail from this text in this explanation as well, which is useful because this text generally isn't available because it includes highest yoga tantra content, but the explanation of the transitory collection comes from the sutra section of Great Treasury of Mahamudra. So those words right at the beginning, so the view of the transitory collection is a deluded view that observes the appropriated aggregates and conceives of them as I and mine. It's not actually a definition. It's more like a description of how the view of the transitory collection works. The actual definition Geshe gives on page 180 of the Mahamudra text, and he says that it is a self-grasping of the person that holds one's own self as an inherently existent self. So there's a bit to unpack here. So the first, the view of the transitory collection is a self-grasping of the person. So we talked before about, when we were talking about the 4th root delusion, that self-grasping ignorance, generally there are 2 types. Firstly, there's self-grasping of the person, and secondly, there's a self-grasping of phenomena, that is, of objects other than the person. Here, when we're talking about the view of the transitory collection, we're only talking about the first. So it's a view of the person rather than of other phenomena as well. Secondly, from the definition, we're talking about holding one's own self as an inherently existent self. So again, the self-grasping of the person, that also has 2 different aspects. Firstly is self-grasping at one's own person, at me. We conceive of ourself as inherently existent. And secondly, we have a self-grasping of the person that's directed at other people. So we see somebody else and we grasp at that other person as being inherently existent. That's also a self-grasping of the person. When we're talking about the view of the transitory collection, we're only talking about the first. So the view of the transitory collection is a self-grasping ignorance, but it's grasping at persons and not phenomena, and in particular, it's grasping at one's own self, not at persons generally, and it's grasping at one's own self as being inherently existent. Geshe next says that this view is understanding with delusion. So what does that mean? So what he's really saying here is that there are some things that are right, are correct about this view, and there are some bits of it that are wrong or confused. What is it that's right and what is it that's wrong? Well, firstly, he says it's understanding with delusion because the observed object, the thing that the view of the transitory collection observes, is a self that's merely imputed on the collection of the five aggregates, or merely imputed on its parts. And that exists, that actually exists conventionally. The thing that the view of the transitory collection is observing is existent. However, this view apprehends that self as being permanent, as existing independently, and as existing inherently, or from its own side. In fact, there is and logically cannot be a permanent, independent, or inherently existent self. But nonetheless, we experience the self, our own self in this case, in that way. And that's a mistake. That's the way, that's the respect in which the view of the transitory collection is deluded or mistaken. So this view is correct in that it views a self that's merely imputed on the five aggregates, but it's incorrect in that it conceives of it as being truly inherently existent, independently existent. What is it that the view of the transitory, so it's called a view, what is it that it's actually viewing? So if you're in the temple or you're looking online, then at the moment you have a view of various things. So you have a view, for example, of the photo of Geshe Loden behind me. What is the object of your viewing consciousness? What is it that you are viewing? In this case, you're viewing the photo of Geshe. If you have a view, say, about Melbourne, when there are two aspects to that. Firstly, there's a referent object. What is it that that view of Melbourne, what is it that it's pointing to? What is it that it's referring to? Well, it's referring to a city in the southern part of Australia that's the capital of Victoria, that's at about a certain latitude and longitude. There's also a conceived object. So that's like when I say Melbourne, you have an idea, a concept of Melbourne. So that's the conceived object of your view. So there's a difference between the referent object, what it's pointing to, and the conceived object, the way you actually conceive of it. Here, when we say what is it that the view of the transitory collection is viewing, what it sees, its referent object, what it's actually seeing, is a self that's merely imputed on the collection of the five aggregates, or merely imputed on the collection of the parts. Or in Great Treasury of Mahamudra, Geshe says a little bit differently. What it's seeing is the mere I that is imputed on one's continuum of five aggregates. So that's what it's actually pointing at. What it conceives, what it actually thinks it's seeing, the way it puts it together, how it conceptualizes that merely imputed self, is that it's something that's existent from its own side, independently. And so it conceives that that object is an inherently existent self or an inherently existent person. So the referent object, what the view of the transitory collection is pointing at, actually does exist. The conceived object of the view of the transitory collection doesn't exist. So in a way, that's a different way of coming back to the previous point, what's right about the view of the transitory collection and what's confused about it. So I've run out of time, so got a little bit more to cover, so I won't go into more detail on it. But briefly, what I will look at and what it would be useful to look at between now and then is to ask yourself. So it's called the view of the transitory collection. What does collection mean? What's that about? What it's referring to? So we'll talk about that next week. But it would be most useful to have a think about that in the meantime. Secondly, it's called a transitory collection. What does transitory mean? What's that getting at? And secondly, it would be useful to look at Geshe's explanation of the two types of the view of the transitory collection. That is the view that holds I and the view that holds my. But I'll go into that next week, and in particular I'll bring in some of the explanation that Geshe gives in the Great Treasury of Mahamudra. And after that, we'll continue. We'll go through the remaining of the diluted views and get on to the next section. Again, if anybody has any questions, I've run out of time, but please feel free to send them through. You can send them through to events@tushita.org, and if you have any questions, then I can pick them up next week. But we will finish with the dedication prayers. So I'll begin. So we'll first do in English the final prayer of the graduated. By the two collections vast as space, amassed with effort for a long time, may I become a chief of conquerors, a guide for all beings whose mind's eye is blinded by ignorance. Also in all lives while not yet come to that, may Manjushri favour me with his compassion. Finding the supreme path, complete with all stages of the teachings, may I please the conquerors by practising well. By my precise understanding of the essential points of the path, with skillful means drawn along by strong compassion, and by dispelling the mental darkness of beings, may I uphold the conqueror's teaching for a long time. Where the supreme precious teaching has not spread, also where it has spread but become degenerate, with a mind deeply moved by great compassion, may I make clear this treasure of benefit and bliss. The stages of the path, excellently established by the marvellous deeds of the conquerors and their sons, give glory to the minds of those aspiring for liberation. May the conqueror's deeds be long preserved. May all humans and non-humans remove the obstructions and establish conditions favourable to cultivating the excellent path, never be parted for all of their lifetimes from the purest of paths which the Buddhas have praised. When someone makes effort to practice properly the 10 points of conduct of the Supreme Vehicle, may he always be assisted by the mighty protectors, and may oceans of good fortune spread out, reaching all. And a general dedication in Tibetan English. Ngewadi che boko sonam yeshe zog zog jen sonam yeshe le jong Damba Kunye Topasho. By this virtue may all beings complete the collections of wisdom and merit, and attain the true holy bodies arisen from wisdom and merit. Jangjo Sam Jogrem Boche Ma che panam che jo che panyamba me pai gong ne gong du. May the precious superior mind of enlightenment be generated in those who have not yet generated it, and not decrease in those who have developed it, but increase continuously. Okay, thank you everybody. In particular, thank you Manikam and his apprentice, and see you next week.